"Don't jump," Michael said softly, his voice almost swallowed by the relentless rain and howling wind. But those words, faint as they were, became the single fragile thread holding two people in a world that seemed to have already shattered. Three strangers, three struggling souls, converged on the stone bridge on a fateful night where the line between life and death was so thin. In Michael's arms, his 3-year-old son, Tommy, stirred. The boy's breathing was heavy with fever, occasionally punctuated by a dry cough. The weight and warmth of the child were a harsh reminder of his responsibility, of the very reason he had to be there. The pharmacy was just on the other side of the bridge. Michael needed medicine for Tommy, but his old truck had broken down that morning. So he carried his son, weaving through puddles under the flickering streetlights, their shadows long on the wet pavement. It was then that he saw her. Under the pale yellow streetlights, a young woman stood precariously on the edge of the bridge. Her wet brown hair was plastered to her face and thin shoulders, and rainwater streamed down her pale skin. Her thin dress was soaked, clinging to a body that shivered from the cold, and a desperation that was even more chilling than the October night. Her hands were gripping the railing, knuckles white, as if it were the only thread holding her to life. Below, the river flowed, dark and angry, reflecting the shattered lights of the city, ready to swallow everything. "Hey," he called out quietly, one arm holding Tommy, the other gently patting the boy's back. "Hey, miss." The girl did not turn around. Michael carefully took one step after another on the slippery stone, moving closer. "It's a terrible night to be out here without a jacket," he said, his voice still gentle. "You must be freezing." Finally, she turned. Her face was blurred with tears mixed with rain. She was young, maybe 25, with delicate features that reminded Michael of his mother. "Please," she whispered, "just leave me alone." But Michael could not. Not when he had already recognized the profound pain in her empty eyes. "I'm Michael," he said, carefully taking another step. "This is Tommy. We're just trying to get to the pharmacy before it closes." The woman's gaze fell on the little boy, who was peeking out from under the red blanket, curious despite his fever. "Don't jump," Michael said softly, the words hanging in the wet air. The girl flinched as if she had been struck. "You don't understand." "Maybe I don't understand everything," Michael admitted, "but I understand what it feels like for the world to be too heavy to carry. I understand what it feels like to think no one would even notice if you were gone." Tommy coughed softly, and Michael adjusted the blanket for him. "But you know what I learned? Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. Not just for the person who receives it, but for the person who gives it, too." The girl's hands on the railing loosened just a bit. I can't. "What's your name?" Michael asked. "Sarah," she whispered after a moment. "Sarah, I know we just met, but would you mind walking with us to the pharmacy? Tommy has a fever, and honestly, I could use the company. These old streets can be pretty lonely at night." Sarah stared at him, confusion gradually replacing some of the despair in her eyes. "You want me to go with you?" "If you don't mind," Michael replied with a gentle smile. "I have an umbrella in my back pocket. It's not very big, but it's enough to keep you from getting any wetter." For a long moment, Sarah stood motionless, her mind a fierce struggle. A part of her screamed to refuse, that she could not trust a stranger. But another part, exhausted and worn out, clung to the offer like a life preserver. She looked into Michael's eyes and saw no lies or pity, only genuine understanding. She looked down at the little boy in his arms, his big eyes still innocently watching her. A father like this, who braved the rain and wind for his child, could not be a bad person. In the end, the part of her that longed to live, even if it was just a faint glimmer of hope, won out. Then, with a slow movement, as if she had not moved in years, she stepped back from the railing. Michael opened the small, frayed umbrella and held it over her. Though it did not cover her completely, it helped. Tommy had fallen asleep on his shoulder, his breathing a little easier. "Why did you stop?" Sarah asked as they neared the warm light of the pharmacy. "My wife left when Tommy was 6 months old. She said she couldn't handle being a mother. For months after that, I felt like I was drowning, working the night shift at the factory, the day shift at Pete's diner, then coming home to a baby who needed everything from me. He paused, adjusting Tommy's position. There were nights I stood in his room and wondered if he would be better off with someone else, someone who could give him more than I ever could. Sarah looked at him, surprised. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't," he replied. "Do you know why? Because one morning, at my most desperate moment, Tommy smiled at me. He just simply smiled, as if I was the most important person in the world. And I realized that sometimes, being needed is the greatest gift we can receive." They reached the pharmacy just before closing time. The elderly pharmacist, Mrs. Chen, greeted them warmly and helped Michael find the right medicine for Tommy. While Michael paid, Sarah stood quietly by the door, rainwater still dripping onto the polished floor. "Are you all right, dear?" Mrs. Chen kindly asked. "You look frozen." Sarah began, then looked at Michael. "I'm with them." Mrs. Chen smiled and handed Sarah a hot cup of tea from behind the counter. "Here you go. You can't be catching pneumonia." Sarah took the tea, her frozen fingers trembling as they touched the warmth of the ceramic. The warmth spread through her body, dispelling some of the cold. But it was not just the warmth of the tea, it was the warmth of kindness, of concern from a complete stranger. She looked at Mrs. Chen, then at Michael, and for the first time in a long while, a feeling that was not despair began to flicker inside her. It was gratitude. When Michael had paid, they prepared to leave. Mrs. Chen tucked a lollipop into his hand. "For Tommy, when he's feeling better." As they were about to go, Michael turned to Sarah. "Where are you headed? Can I give you a ride?" Sarah's eyes welled up again. I don't have anywhere to go," she said. "I lost my job last week and couldn't pay rent. I've been staying at a shelter, but tonight I just couldn't handle it anymore." Michael gently finished her sentence. Sarah nodded in admission. Michael looked at Sarah, then down at Tommy stirring in his arms. He saw the fragility and panic in her eyes and knew he could not leave her there. It was an insane decision, going against all logic. He could barely afford to take care of himself and his son, so how could he possibly help one more person? But his heart told him something else. It told him that tonight, kindness was more important than logic. "Listen," he began, his voice hesitant. "I know this might sound strange, and you have every right to say no. I live just a few blocks from here. It's not much, just a small apartment above a bakery, but it's dry, it's warm, and there's a sofa. If you need a place to stay tonight, just for tonight, you can stay with us." Sarah looked at him in shock, her mouth open, speechless. A complete stranger, whom she had just met less than an hour ago, was inviting her home. Skepticism and fear battled with gratitude and relief within her. You don't even know me," she stammered. Michael looked her straight in the eyes, and in his gaze, Sarah saw no ill intent, only sincerity. "I know you helped a man and his sick son feel a little less alone on a rainy night," he said with a kind smile. "I know you have kind eyes and a good heart, even if it's broken. Sometimes, that's all you need to start." His words touched a place deep within her, a place she thought had long been dead. She took a deep breath and nodded. A gentle, almost imperceptible nod, but one that carried the weight of a life or death decision. The walk to Michael's apartment was silent, broken only by the sound of the rain and their footsteps on the wet pavement. Sarah held the umbrella, while Michael carried Tommy. The simple act of sharing an umbrella became profound, a small bridge connecting two lonely souls. Michael's apartment was small but warm and clean. Photos of Tommy decorated the fridge, and toys were neatly arranged in the corner, creating the feeling of a home. "There are towels in the bathroom," Michael said, putting Tommy in his crib. "And I think there are still some of my ex-wife's clothes in the closet, if you don't mind wearing something dry." While Sarah was in the bathroom, Michael quietly went to the table and took out his wallet. Inside were only a few crumpled bills and some loose change. He glanced at the overdue electricity bill tacked to the board, a heavy sigh escaping him. The offer he had just made was not an easy decision. It was a real sacrifice. He opened a drawer, took out a faded old photo of his wife, looked at it for a long moment with a sad expression, then put it away, as if putting away an old chapter of his life to begin a new one, even if only temporarily. Michael made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. The simple meal reminded him of his childhood, when his grandmother would make the same on rainy nights. They sat at the small kitchen table, eating in comfortable silence. Outside, it was still raining, but inside the apartment, it felt like a safe haven. "Why?" Sarah finally asked. "Why did you help me?" Michael put his spoon down and thought for a moment. "You know what I regret most about the months after my wife left," he said quietly. "Not the sleepless nights or the struggle to pay bills, but the fact that I became so focused on my own pain, I stopped seeing the pain of others." He looked toward Tommy's room, where the boy's soft breathing could be heard. "He taught me something important. We are all connected. We all struggle. We all hope. And we all need kindness. When you help someone else, you're not just changing their life. You are remembering what it means to be human." Sarah's eyes were filled with unshed tears. "Today I felt so invisible," she said, "as if I could disappear and no one would notice." "But you didn't disappear," Michael said gently. "You are here. You were important enough for me and Tommy to invite you to come with us. Mrs. Chen also noticed you were cold. That's not being invisible. That's being seen." His words were like warm water washing away the icy despair in Sarah's heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but this time they were not bitter. They were tears of relief, of profound gratitude. That night, she slept on the sofa, though it was not the softest bed. Within the shelter of those unfamiliar walls, she had a more peaceful sleep than she had had in months. She felt safe. The next morning was clear and bright. However, just as Sarah was about to thank him and leave, a sudden downpour began, heavier than the night before. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "The weather is terrible out there," Michael said, looking out the window. "You should stay until it stops completely." "I have to stay home to watch Tommy anyway." Just then, there was a knock at the door. Michael opened it, and it was an elderly woman with a kind smile, holding a plate of hot croissants. "Mrs. Flores," Michael smiled. "Michael, I heard Tommy's cough all night. How is he?" she said. Then her eyes lingered on Sarah with curiosity. "Oh, you have a guest?" "Yes, he's feeling better. This is Sarah, a friend of mine." Michael introduced her naturally. "Thank you for the croissants." Mrs. Flores's presence and her kindness made Sarah feel less out of place. She was no longer an anonymous wanderer. She was Michael's friend. In the afternoon, Tommy started crying from fatigue. Michael tried to comfort him, but it was no use. Sarah hesitantly moved closer. "Can I try?" she asked softly. Michael nodded. Sarah picked Tommy up, gently swaying and singing an old lullaby. The gentle, clear melody filled the small room. Tommy gradually stopped crying, his eyes drooping until he fell asleep in her arms. Michael stood watching, a feeling of warmth and gratitude spreading in his chest. In that moment, Sarah was no longer the one who needed help. She was the one who was bringing peace. During breakfast, Sarah learned that Michael worked at both an auto parts factory and Pete's diner. He was saving money to go back to school, hoping to one day become a teacher. "I've always wanted to work with kids," he explained, watching Tommy stack blocks. "I think it's time to stop dreaming and start doing." Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. "I used to teach music," she admitted. "Before everything fell apart, I loved my job." "Music has a healing power," Michael said thoughtfully. "Maybe that's something worth remembering." When it was time for Sarah to leave, she stood by the door, feeling uncertain. The world outside was suddenly less terrifying than the night before, but it was still overwhelming. "Here," Michael said, handing her a piece of paper with his phone number. "If you need anything at all, a friend to talk to, help finding a job, or just someone to remind you that you matter, please call." Sarah looked at the paper, then at Michael and Tommy. "I don't know how to thank you. Just take care of yourself," Michael said simply. "That's enough." 3 months later, Sarah had a job teaching music at a local elementary school. She called Michael to share the good news, and he invited her to dinner to celebrate. It became a regular habit, Sunday dinners where Sarah would play simple songs on Tommy's toy piano while Michael cooked and Tommy danced around the living room. One evening, after Tommy had fallen asleep, they sat together in comfortable silence. Sarah decided to tell Michael more about her past. "Losing my job at the school was just the final straw," she began, her voice low. "Before that, I lost my mom. She was sick for a long time. I spent all my savings taking care of her, but I couldn't keep her here." "I'm so sorry," Michael said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Sarah smiled sadly. "My mom was the most wonderful person. She was also a teacher. She taught at Northwood Elementary for 30 years. Her name was Eleanor Roosevelt." That name made Michael freeze. He looked at Sarah, then as if remembering something, he stood up and went to an old box on top of the cabinet. He dusted it off, opened it, and took out a faded yearbook. He flipped through the pages urgently. Finally, he stopped on one page and turned the yearbook towards Sarah. Is this your mom?" he asked, his voice shaking. In the black and white photo, a young first-grade teacher with a radiant smile stood among her small students. Below the photo was the caption, "Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt." Sarah's mouth fell open, tears welling up in her eyes. Yes, that's my mom." Michael pointed to a skinny boy with messy hair in the front row. "And this is me. Mrs. Vance was my first-grade teacher. She was the first person who told me I could be anything I wanted to be, that I was smart and kind, even though my family was poor. She's the reason I've always held on to the dream of becoming a teacher." A wave of emotional silence filled the room. Michael's act on the bridge that night was no longer a random act of kindness. It was a debt of gratitude being repaid after many years, a circle of kindness that had come back to its starting point in an unexpected way. They never spoke directly about the rainy night on the bridge, but its impact was present in every kind gesture and every moment of connection they shared. Sarah learned that sometimes the darkest nights lead to the brightest dawns. Michael learned that opening his heart to help others also healed his own wounds. And Tommy, he grew up in a home where kindness to strangers was not an unusual thing, where helping people was simply what you did when someone needed it, where love multiplied rather than divided when shared. Years later, when people asked Michael about the night that changed everything, he would smile and say simply, "Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them know they are not alone. And sometimes the person you think you are saving is the one who brings salvation to you in a way you never expected." The old stone bridge still stands in the heart of the city, having weathered countless storms. But now, when Michael, Sarah, and Tommy cross it, they no longer remember the darkness of that rainy October night. They remember a legacy of kindness passed down from a mother, a wonderful teacher. They remember the light that came from two strangers who chose connection over isolation, and that light illuminated a destined path that bound them together. And that light continues to shine, not just from heart to heart, but from one generation to the next, through every small act of humanity.